Hello, welcome back to the channel. You might have been forgiven for looking at the title and wondering if there's some breaking news that Boris Johnson had resigned. No, the answer is not. At this very point, there is no news, but Johnson had not resigned. Sue's Gray report has not come out. But I thought I would focus this video on his legacy. I'm not going to talk about the man, I'm not going to talk about the liar, the cheat, the serial, incompetence that he seems to demonstrate. Other people have covered that in detail. Those who know me also know that I take a very politically neutral stance as much as possible. So this is not any kind of political attack. What this video is about is trying to focus on what he leaves behind. Because he will go one day. He will leave, that time may be sooner, that time may be later, but one day he will stop being Prime Minister. And when that time comes, we will need to think about what sort of country there is, what has he left behind, and what does that mean going forward, because that's very important in a negotiation context. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. So, the first thing I think worth pointing out, a real elephant in the room, or a really obvious issue, Brexit has been utterly toxic to British politics. I don't think that's anything that anyone would disagree with. It has created a very divided country, originally very evenly divided, perhaps less evenly now, more one side or another, presumably. But people have entrenched positions. They've not really reached agreement, not reached consensus. And when you look at democracy as being a bit of a wider negotiation, that's a very failed form of politics. That's a very divisive form of politics, where you create severe tribalism. And the UK political system has been very tribal for a very long time. And while that tribal identity has shifted very much in recent years, the fact that there is severe tribalism, even worse than it ever was, I think is very much a legacy of Brexit. And Boris Johnson, more than anybody else, has done quite a lot to create that legacy in terms of all his actions and the way he's approached all sorts of issues, the way he's tried to appeal to various groups while marginalising others. So that's one huge legacy when talking about what this means for the country. I also want to talk about the rise of racism and intolerance. And this has been very evident in public discourse in the UK. And it's become a political topic. The Black Lives Matter thing triggered a whole host of protest and debate that's happened. But what it also revealed, well, it was being revealed anyway, is the absolute rise, and by any metric that anyone cares to use, any statistics, when it comes to intolerance and racism, that has dramatically increased. When it comes as well to political rhetoric, and the politics are being pursued, including laws, those laws also have their roots in racism and intolerance of others. And Boris Johnson himself has encouraged it in terms of the cultural war, but he's also been an enabler in encouraging various other people, whether in the Conservative Party or even in his own cabinet, to promote this sort of thing. And Priti Patel is a clear example of this. I don't want to hear any crap about anyone saying just because she's a woman of ethnic minorities she can't be racist. She can be racist as anybody else of any skin colour. And indeed the policies she promotes, whether from belief or political expediency, convenience, are exceedingly racist and intolerant. And that is another legacy that will take a long time for the UK system to recover from. There used to be a sense of British values, a long time ago. I'm not that old, but old enough, that the British used to pride themselves on being tolerant, of being opening, of welcoming to a certain degree. That was not always true, but I think now it's even less true. There used to be some truth to it. Now it's even less true. It's just not for anyone from particularly other countries. They all report the same thing. They report a rise in aggression, a rise in intolerant attitudes and expressions and thoughts directed at them because of their cultural differences, sometimes even because of their skin colour. So that's another legacy. We also have huge increases in inequality in the UK. That is no secret. It's a bit of a global problem. It's not exclusive to the UK, but by any economic measures that people wish to use, those at the bottom of the scale get falling even further behind and further away from those at the top of the scale. And it's very striking that during the pandemic and the lockdowns, those at the top managed to increase their wealth quite significantly, despite the lack of production, the lack of manufacturing and services and things that were going on because of lockdowns. So again, government policy has been to widen this inequality. I don't know if that specifically was the intent. Supposedly that government policy was meant to reduce that inequality, create more opportunity, but it seems to have had the opposite effect. So that will be the result. It won't be fixed no matter what Boris Johnson does, and whatever time left for him in the office. He has created that, and that is on his watch. What else we got? We've also got the reduction in life expectancy. Now, many people forget about this. And this is not just because of the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, has worsened this. But even in the run-up to COVID and the pandemic, it was a shocking statistic in the UK that for the first time in an incredibly long time, possibly even forever since records began, life expectancy for the average British citizen actually started to decrease. So for anyone, just think about that. Think about, if you're a prime minister of a country and you keep talking about your successes, and yet at the end of the day, people in that country die earlier now than when you first took over. That's a sad indictment of anything that you may have sought to achieve as a prime minister. So that's a very unspoken but absolutely terrible legacy for anyone to leave any country. I also want to talk a little bit about marginalisation, or the vulnerable, or the undesirables. And this predates Boris Johnson. I can't exclusively put this on his watch. But for anyone, whether of ethnic minority, whether a single working mother, for example, or whether they were disabled or unable to work for any particular reason, they have been left in a position of even more dependent on the state. And there's lots of evidence for this, lots of people who've done studies in this sort of area. They're far from these groups being allowed to have more opportunities, more employment opportunities, for example, more education opportunities. Government policy and the results of government policies have had the complete opposite effect. Now, in many cases, this is because all the services that they relied upon had been cut. So their ability to access assistance, to access resources that will help them, get into employment or travel or whatever it is they want to do, all of that has been reduced. And the end result is that they have to claim more welfare. They're unable to do alternative things because the government has taken all that away from them. And I don't know if that was deliberate. If you're looking at people like Ian Duncan Smith, who has a horrible, influential voice in the Conservative Party, he more than anybody else has driven this awful situation. And for anyone who does not believe me, go and look up the UN report on the treatment of disabled and vulnerable people in the UK. This is the UN talking about, human rights analysis. They didn't use the word economic genocide on the UK. That is because they were too polite. But again, imagine a developed country, a country that championed human rights around the world and the rule of law. It's now a country seen as one that treats marginalised, vulnerable, undesirable people in such a way is absolutely shocking. And again, Johnson, it's not his sole fault that this has occurred, but this situation has only gotten worse under his tenure. Some more things to talk about. Well, I've talked about political divide and the way that this is minimizing compromise. And what I mean by that is that whatever people's political differences, they would usually try and find ways to work together. They would try and reach a compromise, try and reach some kind of important common objective, whether that was reducing inequality, reducing poverty, increasing employment, increasing gross domestic product, anything like that. People would try and reach a compromise on how to achieve that. And I feel that in the current political climate, that's gone. People dislike the other side so much that they can't reach compromise. And when you end up in a situation like that, especially in an adversarial political system, you're in a very dangerous territory of massive political swings and massive gaps between almost two different blocks of voters, especially in a two-party system. And that's not healthy. That's not healthy at all. So that's another legacy, and Boris Johnson is directly responsible for that. He created that situation. He had gone to the extremes in his rhetoric, in his presentation, and he had forced even opposition parties to go to the extremes. And now the opposition party can't even compromise with his parties because that divide is now just too great. And I think I'll talk about a final thing, which is a lost generation. Think of all the younger people at university age, perhaps even just a bit younger. Their job prospect, their ability to earn more than their parents is less now than it was. This links back to the reduction in life expectancy in a way. And the younger generation are going to be poorer than the previous generation, people of my generation even. And generations under that, those who should have been in school and had their education disrupted because of the dreadful decisions made by Johnson and his government during the pandemic, they've lost that education. They've lost some of the socialization skills that they should have had. They've lost some of the ability to interact, to think through things. So in some way, that is a generation that's going to grow up more resentful. It's going to have reduced prospects. It's also a generation that's not going to understand compromise. It's going to understand sticking to extreme positions, no matter whether that position is correct or not. That is what they have seen in the leadership. That is probably what they will grow up believing they should be like to be successful. And that's a future time bomb if that's not corrected. So as with anything, with politics, there's a time lag. And no doubt Johnson will talk up his time and that he achieved great things. But when all these damaging effects start to kick through in a few years' time, whoever is in charge at the time will possibly be blamed for it. Certainly will have to deal with the consequences of it. Who knows where Johnson will be? Probably writing a book, doing speeches, earning lots of money, whichever. But this will be his legacy. This will be what he leaves behind for the country to deal with. And the damage goes even further than that. Let's look at some other fundamental things that have happened. Today's political bombshell in some ways was that the Metropolitan Police have obstructed the report that was looking into all the party scandal at number 10 during lockdown. And I used the word obstructed deliberately because whilst it is credible that the police would not want anyone releasing information that could impact an investigation and impact their ability to bring a successful case in front of a jury, we all know that the Metropolitan Police is not going to bring any charges against Number 10 or the Prime Minister. They're not going to bring this case in front of a jury in a Crown Court. So for them to make this request is obstruction. And it's already been commented that this indicates, and it's not an isolated issue, but that the Metropolitan Police, more so than others, hopefully, has been politicised. It's now seen as an arm of the state, doing the state's bidding, rather than countering the state, rather than being what the roots of the UK police force were, which was to be an agency serving the people. That increasingly no longer seems to be true. They're now an agency serving the government and not even protecting the people from the government. Almost the opposite. So that is a terrible thing, again, and a decline in what used to be seen as a staple British institution. You know, the neutrality, the impartiality, the supposed fair-handedness of the police, that's been called into question. We're also called into question the politicisation of the civil service. And there's lots of examples of that. And the civil service have been diminished over many years anyway. They've been cut back in terms of number, but also they've been undermined in a whole variety of ways that have reduced the quality of the people in the civil service. And what that means is, where in the past the civil service was always seen as a politically neutral organisation that behind the scenes would challenge ministers, give them good advice and help them make good government decisions. That's all gone now. Those people don't exist. Anyone who dares challenge the political consensus is removed. So for those, especially in the senior civil service, to actually progress in their careers, they have to toe the political line, whatever that political line may be. They cannot challenge it. They cannot be experts in their fields and say this is the wrong thing to do, because their career will suffer as a result of it. And we've seen that in the Department of International Trade, in their inability to challenge ministers like Liz Truss and the dreadful free trade agreements that they were pushing forward, and the huge errors that they were making in the Withdrawal Act and the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the EU. They didn't have that competency, they didn't have that confidence anymore to do that. And a more recent example that I was utterly horrified to see a tweet from the Foreign Office, which was all about Northern Ireland Protocol. And that tweet was, in my view, an extremely politicised tweet. And civil servants are meant to be neutral. They're not meant to meddle in politics. They're meant to put factual information out there for the public and politicians to draw their own opinions from, based on their ideology. But the facts are meant to be out there. But that tweet about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the way it was not fit for purpose, it was exceedingly political, exceedingly unfactual, and no government department should ever be putting tweets out like that. And that, to me, was quite shocking, actually, that they had descended so badly. The Foreign Office used to be seen as quite good on this, working behind the scenes and being politically neutral. And we can see that that Liz Truss has already fatally undermined that in her short tenure. Also, we have to talk about social care. And these are another element of those who are vulnerable, those who are dependent upon the state for services, whether through mental or physical incapacity, whether due to their age. They have nothing, or they have nothing unless they're wealthy. If they're wealthy, they can manage, although even for the not hugely wealthy, that can be a struggle. And this has been decades worth of underinvestment or poor decision making. But that has accelerated under Johnson. So, and this is painfully obvious now. This is why there's all this talk about national insurance rises, but actually no genuine plan for fixing the problems. We can see this in the NHS as well. I think there's a lots of alarm bells being sounded that the NHS has become structurally unsound. It literally cannot sustain. It is just now in an impossible position. Something's going to have to give, because the NHS is broken. It had been broken. It had been broken by a lot of government policies, and I'm not just looking at the Conservatives here. Before the Conservative Party took office in 2010 with the Lib Dems, the NHS had problems that weren't addressed by the previous Labour government. All of that has been made worse, and it reached rapid crisis point under Johnson. And again, this is no accident. It is absolute coincidence that the Conservative Party and Johnson are weakening the NHS while taking a lot of political donations from private health companies. It's been going on for many years, but Johnson has obviously hoovered up lots of political donations, and this has been no exception. It's even been reported that the UK government is willing to put the NHS on the table in negotiations with the US government for the free trade agreement. So we know that the NHS is in dire straits at this point. What else can we talk about? Well, we can talk about critical government budgets. And it's not just about, cutting of services, but the ways that government budgets and departmental budgets are now almost subservient to the need to funnel money to private companies, many of whom, by the way, by complete coincidence, of course, happen to be quite significant donors to the Conservative Party. People that Johnson seemed to rather like. He's a big fan of industry taking over government functions. He's made no secret of that. But the end result has been that all those budgets, especially when they're given to private industry, there's a huge amount of wastage, corruption, and unsustainable debt that has resulted as a result of all those changes. And this has been driven forward by Johnson at quite considerable speed. Another huge thing to talk about on this topic is the judiciary. And it's been painfully obvious that the media, egged on by Johnson, and Johnson himself as well, in certain ill-advised comments, has tried to very much undermine the judiciary. And Dominic Raab is, at this point in time, trying to drive forward legislation that again would undermine the judiciary and transfer power to politicians. So just think about that for a minute. The result of Brexit was meant to be taking back control, improving British democracy, and yet the end result is they even removed power from judges and give it to not always elected politicians. You can spot the potential for future disaster in that sort of scenario. Which comes to the next point, of course, is that Parliament itself has been fatally undermined, perhaps, in certain areas. Parliament has been weakened in a way that possibly can't allow it to continue in its current form. The way Johnson has run roughshod over Parliament is absolutely legendary. He's broken all the rules that there are, every single convention, the ministerial code. Just about a few rules apart from murdering MPs in Parliament that he hasn't actually broken. So Parliament broken as a result. Parliament will not survive, or can't survive, what he has done to it. Parliament now has to be reformed. This is not even a subtle conversation, and has been heavily resisted by all sides in the Westminster bubble for many years, many decades. But even now, they're having to openly talk about the fact that Parliament's been weakened to such an extent it can't be repaired. They can't cover up the cracks anymore. So what are we left with? On top of all of that, we're left with various bits of the UK or Great Britain that no longer wants to be bits of Great Britain. They no longer want to be attached to all these issues I mentioned before, whether they're the Scottish National Party or the nationalist parties in Northern Ireland or in Wales. They don't want to be associated with this mess anymore. They believe they can do better. They can make decisions that serve their citizens better because, quite frankly, how could they do any worse? That is their opinion, that is their belief, and that is a message they're going to promote quite strongly in the coming years. So again, this could well be a short or long-term legacy from Boris Johnson, that he had successfully broken up the union. So he had done the job for the nationalists for them. He had the best recruiting sergeant they have got. And that is very obvious. So what else? There's a few final things I perhaps want to talk about. I like talking about democracy. Democracy is an interesting topic to me. And one thing I always like to tell people, remind them about, that democracy is a battle that doesn't involve bloodshed. In the olden times, if you had your differences with another country or another, political group or religious group, then all too often those issues were settled with violence. Democracy was meant to do away with that. The battle was meant to be conducted with words, with ideas, the ability to negotiate, the ability to persuade, the ability to reach compromise with other groups. That is what democracy fundamentally is. So what are we seeing, really, under Johnson's tenure? Well, as I've talked before, there's an increase in extreme positioning. Even the opposition parties are having to differentiate themselves to stand out from all the noise by going to extreme positions. That is what they're talking about. They don't go to the middle ground anymore, not as much as they used to, because the middle ground has been refined. There is no middle ground in some ways. There's us and them. And so when you have political discourse that is like that, then the ability to reach compromise and to have a functioning democracy that doesn't turn into anger or into violence starts to reduce. That's a legacy. And Johnson did it deliberately to stand out, to make himself distinct. But that will have long-term consequences, negative ones at that, I fear. Another hugely important element of democracy is the ability to have access to a wide variety of credible news, credible sources of information. And I don't think it takes too much of a genius to see that in recent years that has been massively distorted. The news production in the UK, the mainstream media, served the interest of a narrow group of people. And those groups of people are people that Johnson, who used to be in journalism, he knows who those people are. He has a personal relationship with them. And he had made it a specific point of courting those people, of promising them things, of making sure they are on his side, and making sure as much as possible that whatever he says, they will report reasonably positively. Obviously not being completely successful in that regard. So any lie he tells, any distortion of truth, and he does it a lot, again that's no secret, he has captured the media in a way that they will just regurgitate what he has said, because he serves their interest. And even Dominic Cummings reports that policy was made based on the Daily Mail headlines. He pointed to that fundamental truth. Johnson doesn't have principles, he doesn't have policies. He just goes with whatever serves his interest and whatever has mass appeal. And that has been an awful legacy for UK democracy, because it fatally undermined people's trust in news sources. This is why Russian cyber warfare is all about that. It's all about undermining democratic trust in what should be trusted sources of news, because then that disintegrates the power of the state, that reduces the ability of the state to build consensus and effectively to resist Russia. That's why they do it. But they haven't had to do it in the UK. Johnson has done it for them, quite happily. We also have a crippled economy, and I know this will be disputed by many people, but Brexit has structurally weakened the UK in ways that will take an exceedingly long time to fix. I'm not just talking about the really bad free trade agreement. I'm also talking about the inability to access labour, as used to be, the complete flight of talent and investment, and people just don't want to invest in the UK anymore. And that's one of those things that takes a few years to come through the system, but we're already seeing the impact on the economy. And something I always like to point out to people that, it's very hard to improve an economy with good policy decisions. It takes a few years before you see the effects of those policy decisions. But it's very easy to wreck an economy in a shorter space of time by bad policy decisions. And we're seeing a lot of that already. We're also seeing awful laws. There's a whole spectrum of these, but I'm going to single out for particular criticism the Policing and Nationalities Bill, whatever the hell that thing is called. That is an absolute travesty of a law. The way it reduces protest, the way it fundamentally breaks international laws and principles in the treatment of refugees, for example. This links back to the previous issue about the rise in racism. The desire of Johnson and his supporters to eliminate the Human Rights Act, and while there can be arguments made that the Human Rights Act needs improving, we know full well that that is not the intent. They intend to reduce it, not improve it. So that, what are we left with? We're left with a very disillusioned electorate who understand all these things have happened but feel powerless to do anything about it, powerless to make a vote or effect a change that will impact things positively. Democracy in the UK is not dead, not yet, but it is at a crossroads, and it's at a crossroad that will be very hard to turn back from, very hard to remedy, to repair, and that's a scary thought. It's a scary thought of what happens, whoever comes after Johnson. What will they be left with? What choice will they make? Will they fix democracy, or will they, will they carry on the path that he has set? And yet, before anyone commented, I know I misspelled democracy here. I've just spotted this, so get that in the head before anyone points it out to me. So, what's my conclusion here? I don't have a political axe to grind. I don't, I try not to support any political party. I try to criticize every political party. But I'm not going to defend the indefensible. And my honest opinion, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this opinion, I'm sure possibly even history will validate this opinion. But my opinion is Boris Johnson is easily and by far the worst Prime Minister the UK has ever had. And the legacy of his tenure will be felt for many decades, and it will be a very difficult legacy to get rid of. So I hope you found that interesting, a bit more of a political discussion than usual, but I feel it's worth analysing these issues, because of course the next stage we're going to have to think about is what do people do to fix them, and that is what negotiation is all about. Calmed, rational people thinking through the issues, cutting through the noise. Those people, whoever they are, and I don't see them yet at the top of British politics, but whoever they are, they need to stand up, they need to make their presence felt, and they need to solve this legacy issue. They need to turn things around, and I don't know yet how they're going to do that, but I hope that in my small little way, this video helps to push that forward. So thank you very much for listening, and please look forward to seeing your comments below the video.